let me try and describe a bit of the scene around me. I'm standing looking towards the sea, but there's hills across in front of me, and behind me, well, I've got a beautiful pink rhododendron in full flower. I've just walked past a whole lot of eucalyptus trees. There's some trees in amongst me that almost look tropical. In fact, there's all kinds of stuff. It is an abundance of plants. So what is an extraordinary piece of plant paradise doing in amongst the wild, rugged Scottish Highland hills of Wester Ross? Well, we're going to find out in this episode of the North Coast 500 podcast. I'm Pennie Stuart.
And I'm Dan Holland. And if you're looking for inspiration for this part of your trip, look no further, because coming up on this episode of the North Coast 500 podcast, I'll be dipping into history with the story of one of the most daring Allied operations of World War II.
Loch Ewe was an ideal place to start assembling the convoys. And they would either sail direct from here to Murmansk and Archangel, or they'd go up to Iceland, where they would meet up with other convoys and receive more escorts.
And I'll be trying not to get too close to the water when I climb some sea cliffs.
I think the having a little bit of ocean swell out there definitely adds another dimension. Something quite different about sea cliff climbing that I just really love. You know, it is sort of the juncture point between what is a really big and powerful ocean out there and the land, and you get to kind of dance in between it, really.
All of that coming up, but first of all, let's find out more about exactly where we are, because we are standing in the National Trust for Scotland's Inverewe Gardens, just north of Poolew. Martin Hughes is the operations manager. Martin, what an amazing place. Give us a sense of the lie of the land and the size and sort of scope of the gardens around us.
Hi Pennie, yes, Inverewe Gardens, it's 55 acres of garden, but we're standing here today and we're right in front of Loch Ewe, and we've got a barren hillside. It's March now, so spring hasn't formally arrived yet, and it's just covered in birch and heather, and it's very brown. We've got torrent sandstone, and I'll be honest with you, it's pretty bleak over there. And then, as you just described, you turn around and we've got this tropical paradise of plants from all over the world that they just shouldn't be here. It's the Highlands of Scotland. It just shouldn't be happening. But we're blessed to be on the west coast of Scotland, and obviously we get the benefits of the North Atlantic drift. So the temperatures here tend to be 1 to 2, sometimes 3 degrees warmer than the rest of the Highlands. So we've got this warm body of air blessing us in the winter, and it's a warm body of water as well. So Osgood Mackenzie, who's the founder of the garden, he was onto something. He realised that, hold on, I can plant stuff here that shouldn't be growing. So we're blessed now with his foresight and legacy that we do have a tropical paradise up here in the Highlands. And for people that really, you know, gardens are a garden. You know, everyone's into plants and gardens, but for me coming here for the first time, I was blown away by what's here, because it just shouldn't be.
It's such a surprise.
Yes,
it's such
absolutely.
A surprise.
Yeah.
I've never been here before. It's been on my bucket list forever, and so I'm so pleased to be able to kind of come and finally have a good rummage around. But it is a surprise, and there is almost a sense of the tropical about it. I mean, is this all down to that warm air?
Pennie, you're absolutely. There's two things really. Yes, we're blessed with the North Atlantic drift, but Osgood Mackenzie, who founded the garden in 1863, he had the foresight again to realise that he couldn't just build a garden. He had to protect it from obviously the Highland gales that we get regularly right throughout the winter and summer, to be honest. So the first thing he did was plant trees. That's the first thing he did. He looked at the barren landscape here, which is exactly like what I described earlier was over here. Heather, birch, torrent landscape, really rugged. And he planted what we call now the shelter belt. So he planted birch and willow and hazel all round the edge of the garden, as it were, and he let it grow 20 years. He didn't do anything else, he just let this shelter belt grow. So it's a combination of the North Atlantic drift and this wonderful shelter belt that protects the garden from all the harshness that is out there in the winter in Scotland, and it's allowed these amazing plants to flourish.
What was his motivation then when he started? When did he start? Put us in a time scale.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we know from in the archives that He had a passion for the outdoors, he had a passion for plants. Our head gardener Kevin refers to him, he was a true plantsman. So he had that passion and he had that interest, and he was fortunate that his mother gifted him the land and bought the land from in this area to give him an opportunity to go and create a garden and create what he wanted. So he had that vision, he had the opportunity to do it back in 1863, and he decided then that this was where he was going to build his house, his family house. And there's a lovely piece of Torridon sandstone further up in the garden, and you can see the shelter that provided, and that's where he put his house down, the first one, and at the same time planted these trees. And I've always been in awe of him, the way that he's been able to slow down, plant the trees and wait 20 years until he started his project again. Can you imagine that happening now? People waiting 20 years.
He must have had an incredible vision.
Yes.
A sense of foresight.
Very much so, Dan. Again, I think that must have been the skill he had with plants. And from what I can gather, a lot of it was very experimental. We thought, right, I'm just going to pop this in here. And one of the examples I like to use, there was a plant called Darcy's aromatica, which is basically Tasmanian pepperberry, which we're now using in our gin this year. But he got that and put it in, and he referenced how well it grows here. So Tasmanian pepperberry in the northwest of Scotland that we're now using in our own gin. It's fantastic.
It's really clear Osgood Mackenzie's left an incredible legacy here in Poolew, and I know that this year is a very special year for you. It's 100 years since his death. How are you marking that legacy here at Inverewe this year?
Yes, Dan. So in our visitor centre, we're just going to open this season a brand new exhibition in his memory. At the moment, when you walk into our visitor centre, you're very conscious you're in a garden environment, but we haven't maybe told that story that I've just tried to describe to you today very well through our interpretation. So our new exhibition will launch on the 15th of April when we open, and it's literally a walk-through timeline of from 1863 through to the modern day of everything that's happened through the archives that we've managed to extrapolate that's worked really well. So customers will be able to come in and get a real feel for the history of the garden. And as we say quite often here, it's more than just a garden. It's a unique part of Scottish history. It's not just a garden, it's part of the landscape now of the Highlands, and it needs to be celebrated. So that's how we're doing it.
It sounds absolutely fascinating. I want to go and explore more of this garden here.
Let's go! We're blessed with this wonderful view where generally many days you can see the white-tailed sea eagle, which was introduced in the Outer Hebrides a few years ago, and then more so on the west coast of Scotland. But they seem to be thriving in this part of the Highlands. And for me, the blessing of being able to stand here and see a white-tailed sea eagle below you is just breathtaking. But to your question on, we've reintroduced red squirrels in this part of the garden, which are flourishing as well. The white-tailed sea eagles, and I can tell you're a bit distracted at the moment because literally a heron has just flown, 30 metres over your head, just gliding majestically through the air. The wonderful things, we've got a heron nursery in the garden, which has been thriving for many years now here at Inverewe. We were a wee bit worried in February because we had Storm Corrie come through the garden, and literally the nest that the herons were using was blown out the top of these trees. And then we didn't see the herons for at least 3 weeks. They did come back, but they seemed very displaced, and it's only literally today that we're now seeing these herons settling on one particular tree, which has filled us all with sheer joy because we know now they're going to nest again, and we'll get that wonderful experience of being able to see the herons gliding across the sea into these wonderful high-top trees you see around you and start feeding their young, which in May and April is just, it's one of the most beautiful things I've seen living in Scotland.
Now, over the years, I've walked, kayaked and cycled through great swathes of the northwest of Scotland. I think it is quite simply one of the most spectacular places on the planet. But one thing I haven't done yet is climb it. So Tim Hamlet of Hamlet Mountaineering, who's based a bit further north from here near Acklesey Buoy, took me to one of his favourite local climbing spots. How tight do I need to have this harness?
So, not so tight that you can't breathe. You definitely want it slightly tighter than that. And the idea is that if you can sneak your hand into the harness and you can't pull a fist back out, that's tight enough. So I'm going to get my harness with all this jingle jangle on, And then basically how this works is there's actually nothing on the rock already. So I'm going to place all of this equipment into the rock, and it's your job to take it out as we go up. But I'll talk you through each and every stage.
You could probably hear the sea crashing away in the background, but where exactly have we come?
So we're sort of at a kind of northwest corner in a way. We're at a tiny little spit of land called Coigach, at the very end of which is a tiny village called Reef. So we're at this very little village called Reef, and it kind of is Reef by name and sort of Reef by nature. We really are stuck right out here at the end of the peninsula. It's a tiny little kind of rocky spit of land, but it's just tremendous for climbing.
Even just standing here, we've got the rock sheer up above us and the sea pounding in behind us. It raises your heart. It's an exciting, dramatic place to be, isn't it? And we've got the most beautiful day. There's a bit of wind and the seas are boiling away behind us.
I think the having a little bit of ocean swell out there definitely adds another dimension. Something quite different about sea cliff climbing that I just really love. You know, it is sort of the juncture point between what is a really big and powerful ocean out there and the land, and you get to kind of dance in between it, really.
In terms of the climbing, Tim, how does this area fare? I mean, is it good climbing around here?
Fabulous climbing at Reef. I would personally say it's one of the most underrated rock climbing venues in Scotland. Reef has so many different levels of ability. You know, you can have everything here from relatively easy beginner terrain all the way up to real test pieces for this hardened adventure.
This is us at the start of it now.
I think the other thing that's so fascinating about Reef is actually the rock type itself. So we're looking at 1 to 1.2 billion year old Torridonian sandstone right here, and you can actually, if you look very closely, see the bedding planes from how the rock was actually laid down. Just that little strip there has a small area where the pebbles are slightly larger than the rest of the grain, and that was one stormy event in the life cycle of building this particular rock.
And do you think about that when you climb? Are you conscious of?
I think
that
more so now. Yeah,
history?
my geology is very amateur, but I do enjoy thinking about the process that made these particular rocks, and I find it really fascinating. And when I have kids here rock climbing, and it doesn't happen very often, but if they manage to kick a pebble and that comes off and you say you're the only person ever to see that bit of rock in a million years, and their brains just sort of take a little while to compute that. It's astronomical lengths of time, really.
In terms of age, how accessible a pastime, sport, hobby is something like what we're doing today? I mean, what kind of age range do you take out?
Yeah, very good question. So I've been taking my kids since they were extremely young. I think I would take from about the age of 5 or 6 to get the most out of it. Although my kids are 5 and 3 and they love coming down here to play. So it is down to the parenting style, I think. There's a lot of that. I would say that to survive for a day and not get too bored, maybe slightly older, sort of 6 and above, would be preferable. I've definitely remember one particular day where a girl who was 7 spent the majority of the day rescuing starfish from a rock pool, and as the tide got lower and lower, she got more and more worried about these poor starfish, and she counted 37 that she'd placed back into the water and saved. But she loved it. That was her day. Did a bit of climbing, a bit of rescuing starfish, and had a picnic. So,
and why
all
not?
in, good day.
Right.
So this is going to be your end of rope, and I'm just going to tie you into this just now so that you can't go anywhere.
So just looping that through the front of my harness.
Yep, it's just a little figure of 8 here. Just exactly like you would do if you were rock climbing at an indoor wall or similar. So if you've done any of this before, it's exactly the same knots. And there you are, completely secure and tied into the end of the rope. Don't worry about the fact that the other end isn't connected to anything right now. We'll get to that. But as you say, it's the ambience here that really makes it. The fact that you've got the sea, white and blue and every colour just coming flying into the rock face, and the sound. It just really makes it for me.
I find it particularly interesting because I love this area of the world, and you know I've kayaked up and down bits of it. I've walked up the hills. I've cycled down through it. I've driven through it, but I've never come at it this way.
Yeah.
And I love that idea of,
Yeah.
of coming at a place which is familiar, but in a way that renders it completely fresh and new, and makes you see it differently all over again.
Yeah.
And that excites me always.
And you've kind of really hit on something there. It's the differences of perspective that you can create doing a little bit of outdoor adventure up here. And that's why I think it's such a fascinating place. You know, the ability to step off the road a little bit and have a totally different perspective on what you've seen even hundreds of times. And for me, although I'm here a lot, it's never the same twice. And I just love that. Whether you're sea kayaking, whether you're going jumping in and swimming around in the sea on a calmer day, or whether you do a bit of sea kayaking, there's just so many options. It's an absolute playground.
Okay,
Happy with that?
think so.
Just remember to breathe. So I'll make my way up to the top then, and that means that I get to sit in the sunshine at the top there. Once I'm up there, and I'll connect up a series of protection and create a little nest called a belay. Once I've made that belay, I'll shout the words, "I'm safe," and that means you're okay to take me off the belay at the bottom. Once you've undone that, I'll pull all the rope to the top. I'll then connect all the ropes, and when that comes tight and I shout the words, "Okay, start climbing," then you can come on up.
Okay.
So off I go. And the real trick to the climbing here is just to take your time about it. And I've reached a little ledge, so I'm going to place one of those cams in the rock there, just to make myself safe on the next little section. Right, I've got one more bit to do. Okay, Penny, that's me safe. So
Okay.
you can take me off the belay if you unclip that.
Unclip this.
Perfect. Okay, are you ready?
Think so.
Brilliant. Well, if you want to make your way up towards me, don't forget to remove the pieces as you go along.
So take that off there,
Lovely.
onto the back.
Okay, next section.
Right, talk me through this bit, Tim.
It's all about the footwork. If you can think where the next foot is going to go, put it there. And if you can move your foot even just a fraction of an inch higher, aim for the slightly higher foothold. So always think, how can I move my feet? Perfect. Great work.
The rock it was very slippy down the bottom, but you're right, it's quite grippy.
So remember what I said about footwork, and if you can move that right foot just slightly, you'll probably be able to access the ledge just above you.
So,
I
right.
think you've cracked it, I think you've got it. That little hand there on the right is probably my favourite hold in this whole climbing venue.
My favourite right at this moment as well, to be fair.
It's just so good.
Ooh.
And take a little moment to gather your breath. There you go. Now it's that left foot, getting that left foot up a little bit, that will give you access to the next section. And that it doesn't feel like there's loads to put the foot on, but the rock is so grippy. Go for it. There you go. Don't forget to bring your right foot with you though. Excellent. And I find that if you exit on this little runnel here where my foot is, that works best.
That was one long breath hold.
What was the word you used? It's exhilarating, I think you said at one point.
What do you think it gives people coming and doing something like this?
there's a real sense of achievement, isn't there? There's a sense of worry, obviously, but being able to overcome that and achieve success is wonderful. But it's not always about achieving success, just being in this location, as you say, seeing it all from a slightly different perspective and just taking those moments to slow down, really, you become incredibly focused on one particular task at hand. All the other worries seem to kind of fade away because you're that focused on what you're doing at that particular moment.
If you want to find out more about what Hamlet Mountaineering has to offer, just go and check out hamletmountaineering.com. You're listening to the North Coast 500 podcast with Pennie, Stuart and Dan Holland. For more information, just head to northcoast500.com. Pennie, that sounded amazing. The roar of the sea. It sounded like a really wild day. Was it as wild as that?
It was fairly wild. At one point we were climbing up to the base of where we were going to get actually climbing in anger, and I said to Tim, I think the waves have been crashing over this bit, but just beautiful, and the colour of the seas there. I mean, I know you know it well from diving around there, but just a special place.
It's a beautiful spot, and the right time of year, as you say, with the right sunlight, the blue sky, the sun beating down. It's tropical there. There's no other way to describe it.
Talking about special places, where have you brought us now, Martin?
Hi, Pennie. Yeah, we're in one of my favourite parts of the garden where we're surrounded by rhododendrons. I think it's a great example of how Inverewe's got plants from literally all around the world. These rhododendrons are part of our rhododendron collection, which we are world famous for, from the Himalayas. And here we are with rhododendron. Some of these rhododendrons around us are between 20 and 40 foot tall. Some of them are over 120 years old. And what fascinates me about some of these rhododendrons is for the 50 years of their lives, they don't flower. They don't do anything. So you have to wait 50 years before you see anything. And now we're in this unique position here at Inverewe. We've got these mature, established, 40 foot tall, 120 years old rhododendrons literally bursting into flower with these huge flower heads. And literally every day around the year in Inverewe, you'll see a rhododendron flowering. It's just amazing.
I have to keep pinching myself and reminding myself as I look around me at this incredible abundance of plants and wildlife that when this started out, none of this was here. That there's been some real alchemy here to create an extraordinary garden where there was just nothing. And I keep catching myself with that and just thinking,
you're right, yeah. It was
wow.
a barren landscape, literally torrent sandstone, that lovely pink sandstone that you see driving around this part of Scotland. And now we have this flourishing oasis of biodiversity and magnificent colour and plants. It's exciting, it really is. For me, it's so much more than just a garden. It's a heritage garden with so much history and a lot of excitement when you come here.
How much are you trying to keep that collection and that conservation of species going now, 100 years on from Osgood Mackenzie's death? How much is conservation part of what you do here?
Dan, it's the ethos of everything the National Trust for Scotland does, is looking after everything that we have, and particularly for the garden. The heritage here is so important to us, so we're trying to keep everything in keeping, and it's hard to imagine what Osgood's would have wanted 100 years on from then, but I think we do a really good job of preserving the heritage here and trying to keep the garden as natural as it would have been for Osgood's time, and that's reflected in the way that much of the garden is just let go to do itself. We just let it flourish in the way that nature wants it to flourish, rather than manicured lawns and perfect plants in the perfect position. It's a very natural landscape now to sit in, and what I love about the garden now is even in the height of the summer, the busiest days, and we might have many guests visiting us, you can lose yourself and feel peace and quiet and tranquility and away from the hustle and bustle and immerse yourself in 1863 and Osgood Mackenzie's times.
Now, as you travel along the main road between here at Poolew and Alt Bay, just a few miles north, you can't help but see what looks like a massive fuel station on the shoreline. And that is exactly what it is. It's a very modern reminder of the extraordinary role that Loch Ewe played during World War II. I met up with Francis Russell in Melon-Charles to learn more.
We are at what was the one of the points of the anti-submarine boom which went across the loch to Firemore Beach, it is straight in front of us virtually. And this whole area would have been, first of all, they have a series of Nissen huts and a very large building and a jetty coming onto the land and a railway coming down to the jetty, and you can still see some bits of it there, and it would have been a hive of activity, and out in front there would have been many merchant ships and naval vessels preparing for the next convoy to Russia.
We're standing in Melon-Charles, over on the east side of Loch Ewe, and the area you've just described as today is a great big concrete pad that it's easily half a football pitch, if not more.
Yeah.
And I've heard it said, Francis, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard it said that during the war you could almost walk across to the island and not get your feet wet.
Yes, that is one of those stories you hear, and only recently I discovered that not only Arctic convoy ships were here, and they formed a very small percentage of throughout the war of the total number of ships, but convoys from Canada and the States would come in here and not unload or anything, but then prepare themselves to go to various different UK ports.
For anybody who doesn't know, just explain to us, what role did Loch Ewe have for the Royal Navy, for the Allied forces during World War II?
Well, Loch Ewe actually has an association with the Royal Navy going back to the First War, because it was treated as an alternate anchorage, not port, no facilities, just an anchorage to Scapa Flow. And the reason for this is that it's broad, it's deep, and it's got a narrow entrance, which suggests that defence is
easily defendable.
Yeah, and so in the Second World War, the Navy were still using it. Unfortunately, right at the beginning of the war, a German submarine U-boat came in and laid some magnetic mines at the entrance, and HMS Nelson, when she was coming in, triggered one of those mines, and 2 other ships were sunk subsequently. So that's when they started thinking about putting up the anti-submarine boom and securing the area with Navy guns and anti-aircraft guns. And then when Germany invaded Russia in July 1941, Churchill decided that we're going to help the Russians, and Loch Ewe is an ideal place to start assembling the convoys. And the reason they chose Loch Ewe was because Liverpool and Glasgow were becoming overcrowded, and so they needed somewhere to get the ships together. And they would either sail direct from here to Murmansk and Archangel, or they'd go up to Iceland, where they would meet up with other convoys and receive more escorts.
And so this whole area along the North Coast 500 route, I believe from Gairloch through Poole Ewe, Alt Bay and Lade, it became a huge military area, didn't it?
In fact, it goes right back to Achnashin,
right,
where they had a sort of control point, and the last the northerly control point was in Lade. And the whole area was secret, and anyone living here had to have a special pass to go in and out. But they do say that, and there were over 3,000 military personnel based around the loch, and they do say that the locals ate better than most people because of all the food that used to come in.
And so when the convoys left from here, did the merchant ships who were going to Murmansk and Archangel, am I right in thinking they gathered here to await their escort vessels and then headed north? Is that right?
Well, because the escort vessels were most of them were based in Scapa Flow, but they would come from other ports. And they would gather, they would sometimes spend a few days here, but they weren't allowed to go ashore most of the time. But the local shops would sell them, necessary foods and things like that.
This concrete pad, which I mentioned earlier on, that we're standing on now, what would be happening right here?
Well, you're standing right now on
I'm actually on a metal rail, aren't I?
a broad gauge railway.
So I am. I hadn't noticed that.
This was all to do with the boom. And if we
And the
come
boom
to
was
the anti-submarine boom, which went across the loch, you see that little island there, went across to there, and then right across to Firemore Beach. And if you come round here, you will see all the concrete blocks which anchored the boom itself, which is a long metal chain, if you like, full of loops.
And we've just come to the top of the beach. You can probably hear the waves lapping in the distance. And there must be 30 odd, 40 odd concrete blocks of a couple of tons each with a big eye in it.
They are big and very, very heavy.
And so this boom net would be strung right across the loch.
Yep, and there was a special ship that would open it to let ships in and out.
Like a curtain.
Yeah.
I notice up at the top, behind the beach, there's a small monument, and it's two silhouetted men.
This is part of our Wartime trail. This was opened only last August, and it was delayed because of COVID, obviously. And it's a series of sculptures and storyboards around the loch. From here, there's one in the village of Alt Bay, there's one in Poolew, and then there's one across on the west side of the loch, and at Cove at the end there's more. And it just tells the story. And so when people come to the museum and they want to find out more, we say, well, look, here's a brochure, and you can go around the loch and see all these, and they are fantastic sculptures. Let's go and have a look.
And so if you're wanting to learn more about the whole relationship of the loch and the communities around it, then the trail would be the perfect thing to go and do that. And
yes.
Take some time and travel the loch.
Now you have to come up to get a good idea of this sculpture. This is the best way to look at it, from about here, because you get the faces seem to come alive.
And we're standing about, 8-9 metres back from it, looking through two silhouetted men to the sea behind. And what are they doing? They look like
they're working on. I never met the sculptor, so I couldn't tell you what they're doing, but they're working on something. They're both seamen.
You can tell that by the hats, can't you?
Yeah. But it's lovely.
It's a very, very poignant reminder of what was happening and the significance of the loch, I guess, and the area around here.
And it is, I always say to people who visit the museum that it was a small, in overall terms of men and material involved, it was quite a small campaign, but it was crucial to the outcome of the war.
It was.
This is the boom vessel.
Here we go, yeah.
Because
well, hold on, that looks like, you see that bit of gangway across there, that looks like
yes,
that
it could be,
there.
Yeah. And this is all the chains holding the boom together.
And in fact, we're just looking at the information board. There's our two men. Look, that's them.
I hadn't noticed that.
We're just looking at the information board.
And this is what it looked like.
Look at these guys.
Yeah, there they are.
I recognise the hat. These are the two men in the statue standing right beside us.
That's how he modelled it.
And you mentioned the museum there, Francis. Tell me a wee bit about the Arctic Convoy Museum project. If you've been to Alt Bay before, you'll know it as the old butcher's shop, of course. But
that's right. Yeah.
I had a wee look in there just before we met, and it is absolutely packed of the most fascinating information. One thing that really struck me when I was looking around this morning was that you've got some storyboards on there, and it's the story not just of a convoy, not just of a particular vessel, it's the story of a particular seaman or sailor. It's very, very personal.
Well, I always say to people, our most precious asset are the stories that we get, because if we don't get them, they're going to be lost forever. And so we have built up a database of well over 4,500 veterans, and it grows every day just about. And we always try to get stories. Sadly, many people come along and say, oh, but he never talked about it.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing you can do about that. But other people come along with precious stories and artifacts and memorabilia. And you know, we get poignant ones, we get happy ones, sad ones, tragic ones, but you know, it's part of life.
And it's part of the fabric of this part of the West Highlands, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm always fascinated when I come and see places like this, and there are sites like this around the north of Scotland that have had a really significant impact during the war.
Mm-hmm.
And you come and visit them today, and there's still something that I sense about the place and its significance.
Yeah.
And it's really nice to stop and breathe it in, I think.
It would be lovely to have a time machine.
Wouldn't it? Wouldn't it? Wouldn't it?
And you can find out more about the Arctic Convoy Museum project by visiting racmp.co.uk. You've brought us to a door.
I have, yes. So we're now at Inverewe House. So this is Osgood's house back in the day, and we've had it renovated in 2016-17 to what the house would have looked like round about the 1920s. We've got the original door handle and everything, this chunky big oak door.
It's an amazing door.
It's just a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Let's go in.
Wow, wood panelled. Welcome to the 1920s, did you say?
1920s, Pennie, yes.
What a view.
A view that looks right out across a front lawn and then across the bay, the head of Loch Ewe towards Poole Ewe village itself.
Amazing big eucalyptus just out there in the garden. And don't know if that wouldn't have been quite that size in old Osgood's time.
We're in the Osgood's living room here at the moment, and we've got a magnificent portrait of the man above the fireplace here now as well. I love the peace and tranquility that you get when you're standing in this room, and for me it's a step back in time to imagine what was life like here in the 1920s with this beautiful garden around you, these magnificent views, and this paradise of a house right bang in the centre of everything that we've seen here today. It's got a real feel about it, a real feel of character, and I love him sitting there with his kilt on. He looks very content.
Is this a picture of Osgood, is it?
Yeah, that's Osgood's there.
He looks quite regal, kind of watching over the gardens.
It's almost in his later years. To me, he just looks content. If it was me, I'd be sitting back going, yeah, look what I did.
Job done good.
Look what I did.
So the house functions as a museum, does it?
Yes, Pennie. So during operational hours, it's a great privilege to be able to open this house to all our guests visiting here at Inverewe. It's all included in the admission price, so we've got 4 wonderful rooms here on the ground floor that customers can explore to their heart's content, take in this ambience and vibe that I'm trying to put across through my voice of how wonderful it is, and it's all a part of the package here. So as I said, Inverewe Garden is way more than just a garden.
I mean, we have very much focused on the garden with our tour today, but as we came here into the house, there was a gallery that we passed. What's the role of that within the garden?
It's lovely. We've got 2 galleries actually here at the moment, Pennie. We've got the Sawyer Gallery where we have different artists exhibiting right throughout the season, local artists and artists from further afield, and we also have a lovely sea and coast exhibition just outside the main house here as well, detailing the rich history of our coastal sea line around Inverewe here as well. So there's plenty to come and see as well as just the house and the garden.
How much of the garden's been an inspiration for artists then over the years?
We think that the way that the garden, the tranquility and the peacefulness of it, it really does inspire. And we've had artists successfully coming through here throughout the years, poetry, great pieces of art. And it's just a tranquil place to reflect and compose yourself, I think, and get away from all that hustle and bustle. That for me is, really feel that, especially in the modern world we're living in now. It is a step back in time, and it does give that peace and tranquility.
I've certainly found that just walking around the gardens today, and I love the informality, the fact that the gardens are absolutely beautiful and pristine, but there's a sense that you can relax here, that you can explore and discover, and you get reveal after reveal after reveal because of the way the paths meander, because it's not set out in a formal kind of way. It's been an absolute delight.
It's just been wonderful. Thank you, Martin.
Oh, it's a pleasure having you guys.
That is it for this episode of the North Coast 500 podcast. A huge thanks to Martin here at the National Trust for Scotland's Inverewe Gardens for making us so welcome and being our tour guide.
Martin, remind us when you're open and how folks can get more information about the gardens.
So we open on Good Friday, 15th of April, and then we'll be open right through to the end of October. And for information on the garden, just visit the NTS website, and we've got all our stories there and everything you need to know.
Can I just rock up, or do we need to book ahead, do you think?
That was that. No, not at all. We're more than much welcome everyone, and the great news is that we take dogs now in the summer, which is something the garden's never done before, so our four-legged friends can join us as well.
Oh, I have visions of rocking up with Charlie and Eddie, my two labs. Careful what you wish for. We have barely scraped the surface of all the great things to do in this area of the route, so do check out the North Coast 500 website and download the app for more inspiration and information.
We hope you've enjoyed this trip around the northwest of Scotland from Penn and from me. Catch you next time.
We'll have to come back again, Pennie.
Do you have a favourite season? If you had to pin it down, when would that be? Is this like favourite child, favourite season?
Yeah, it is. I was talking to Dan as we were wandering around. I said in the spring the action's all out in the rhododendron and the forest, and then it moves into the walled garden and the main drive in the summer, and then come into the autumn you get all the beautiful colours. So I don't think I can. I really.
The North Coast 500 podcast is an Adventurous Audio Limited production for the North Coast 500 Limited.